Peace and blessings, family. I hope all is well. Hold on, let me do a little maintenance real quick. As always, we are live and direct from West Philly. This is your brother Asar Imhotep with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. I want to thank each and every one of you who are listening live, and those of you who are coming back to catch the archives. I appreciate your viewership, your support. So please like and share, and most of all, continue the conversation even after we are done. This is the last and final, I guess last is final, video addressing Dr. Mario Beatty's presentation at the 36th Annual Kemetic Studies Conference organized by ASCAC, which was the 18th through the 21st of April in New York City at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn. The reason why we're doing the video or doing these series of videos is because it was written on the program as a debate in terms of the series of presentations that we were able to show the attendees at the conference. However, there was no question and answer session, and there was no rebuttals. So basically, it was just a regular just conference presentation. So I don't know why it was labeled a debate. But because there was no questions either from the panel or the audience, there were a lot of misinformation and mischaracterization from Dr. Mario Beatty concerning the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet, that it needed to be addressed, especially since we knew that there were going to be copies of the presentation brought online. So if, some viewers were watching the video, it would seem on the surface that Dr. Mario Beatty had presented a rebuttal to our argument being the Shimsu Heru research team, especially me in particular, concerning the meaning of the place name Kemet. And so we wanted to address, again, his statements and to demonstrate that it wasn't a rebuttal at all, especially since he never addressed the topic. So the research topic is, the research question is, what is the meaning and etymology of the place name Kemet? That has always been the debate. But Dr. Beatty decides that he doesn't want to deal with that question. He wants to deal with his own question in terms of why Kemet was named Kemet. And so he's on the side of the argument that Kemet means Black people and Black nation in the abstract, and, modifying Diop's position. So he has a modified Diopian position. And so there were, again, a number of misstatements and mischaracterizations of the argument that we couldn't let it go unchecked. Again, especially since, these videos are posted from the conference on the web. So we decided to do a series of responses to his commentary, and his presentation was 28 minutes. So we broke it down into 3 parts: the first 10 minutes, the second 10 minutes, and then the last 8 minutes. So this is the final one. We're going to address essentially the last 8 minutes or so of his presentation. And so normally I have what Brother Wudjau Iry-Maat with the the Sesh Mani Meta Nature group organization of young up and coming scholars of the Meta-Neter script. But for some reason, I think he may have an emergency or something to this nature. So this show, I will be doing it solo. So excuse the little time delay. That is because I had to find the video. Usually he plays the video and then we make our commentary. So since it is only 7 or 8 minutes of the video left, and we already have addressed many of the major issues, instead of stopping, every so often and then making commentary, I'm just going to let the video play, and then I'm going to make my comments after the whole, video has played. So, but before then, as we have shown on every show thus far, the Seshu the Shimsu Heru research team, which consists of myself, brother Wudjau, and Sonjedi-Ankh-Ra, we have compiled basically our notes and expanded our presentation and put the presentation in book form from the ASCAC conference. And so we came to the ASCAC conference with these in hand, kind of anticipating some of the comments, because I've been dealing with this question for 20 years. And so no one has really surprised me regarding, material dealing with this particular question. So you can kind of anticipate, especially based on the level of research that, the others have been involved with. So in that spirit, knowing that we only had 20 minutes to present our case, we decided that it would be best to put the argument in paper. And so this is a prelude to actually 2 texts. So my upcoming text, Wudjau Volume 2, China into Religion and Philosophy, which is going to have a chapter dedicated to the linguistic argument on the meaning of Kemet. And then we're going to have an entirely, a single text that is going to be dedicated to that question. So this is the first in the series. So this is a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet. You can find this on Amazon.com. Actually, the link is below in the description. So check it out. It's chock full of stuff. So it's currently being reviewed by a number of scholars, and we'll be having a different show, 2 at the latest 3 weeks from now, where those who have actually purchased and read the book will be taking your questions regarding the text and on a live show. So be on the lookout for that. We'll keep you informed. And I'll probably do it on Wudjau's channel or whatnot. So it just depends. So anyway, a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet. Thin book, but full of information. You're going to need to read it a couple of times. So with that said, let me check the chat real quick. Peace and blessings, everyone. Peace to Lord Finesse. What do I see here? Gabe Job, Cedric Ortega, Brother Sean, Maika, Vyasa, Chavez Shady, or Shetty. Who is this? Orondo Branch. Those who I can see right now in the chat room. And so there are many more who are watching who are not in the chat. I want to say what's up and shout out to all of y'all as well. Someone asked if there are going to be digital versions of the book. Unfortunately, no, not at this time. So you'll have to pick up a hard copy. You got to go old school and flip through the pages and bend the corners and underline. So no, not at this time. There's no digital copies. Just the physical copy. So, and right now it's being sold on Amazon.com. So with that said, I am going to get right into it. So I'm going to have to do a little technical switcheroo. So I'm on two machines. I'm on my phone here, but I'm on my computer here. And so if I have both mics on, you'll hear this loud feedback. So let me mute my mic and things here so I can open it up here so you can hear the video and things of that nature. So bear with me for a second. We're going to start the video for Dr. Mario Beatty. So this is my copy of the video that I took at the event. So peace and blessings, any new people watching. So just hold on tight for a second.
Example here, and I give a text where you can read many examples for yourself in Jose Galan, Victory and Glory. Approach me, Kemet. I shall make a storm over the province. My rule is Neket after I have made my tosh as far as I can see. The point is here is that there is, when the ancient Egyptians are in this context spending well over 100 years of fighting each other, there is now a fractured national consciousness. And that fractured national consciousness internally is playing out with this hypersensitivity of borders. Against themselves, initially, this goes into my discourse on Hasi also, that you talked about. Everything is linked. Next one. So, as Asar has rightly said in the presentation, is that in the Old Kingdom, primarily when we look at administrative text, what we can see is we see Tawi, the two lands, we see Idewia, two riverbanks, the two riparian lands with the irrigated canals, and then we see Anu, the residents. Next slide. But somewhere, and this is from Ogden. Ogden says, somewhere around the period when Egypt was once more reunified under the rule of Dynasty 11 monarch that had Petra, Mentuhotep II, the terms Kemet, the Black Land, and Palmeri, the Beloved Land, first made their appearance. And so what Ogden does in his article is, next slide. What Ogden does in his article is that he distinguishes between what he calls non-literary text and literary text, and to try to make this point. And every time that Ogden, this is an inference being made by Egyptologists, that is that when they see Kemet translated in contrast to Deshret, when they see that, they are translating black land. And it has a connotation for them of quote unquote soil, the soil. When they're not seeing that, then they're translating it as Egypt. That is, as something much broader than this. And so Asar makes a point in a presentation that I saw that when you see the determinatives of an irrigated canal on the back of Kemet as opposed to the town or settlement, what Asar said in one of his presentations was that those two determinatives are interchangeable. No, they're not. Those two determinatives are in different semantic universes. So if you see an irrigated canal on the back of Kemet, then yes, it is appropriate, it's quite appropriate to translate that as the black land. The black irrigated land, actually. But if you don't see that, you can't make that translation. When you see the town determinative on Kemet, you cannot make that translation. And it is not inferred or implied. Next slide. So I have some work to do myself because I did a little bit of work at Johns Hopkins, and I said, because all of these texts that Ogden gave were very localized in a particular region called the Wadi Hammamat. And everyone knows is that these inscriptions are interesting because many of them lack definitive clarity in terms of the presentation and depictions of glyphs. And I said, I'm just going to take one text from Ogden, and I'm going to just look at how the word Kemet is actually represented in one of his major citations. Because I don't accept what they say. I always want to have reference, as this is my teaching from Obenga. Give me the original text. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see your mistakes. Egyptologists make mistakes all the time. And here, I don't even have the original text, but I'm actually closer because this is a hieroglyphic facsimile. So I actually tried to get the original text, but I couldn't. We actually need to see all of these texts actually before we even make a final determination on this. But what I want to show you is here. This right here. This right here. This is, quote unquote, their word for Kemet in one of the texts that Ogden Galay cites. You tell me, if you, Mfundishi, anyone in here who is taking the language, you tell me if that glyph looks like the Kemet glyph. You tell me yes or no. The inference that's being made is that because of the phonetic complement is the L, that must be Kemet. I don't see Kemet in there. In fact, the angle is not there on the Kemet glyph. And then it dips, it has a little dip at the end. I'm not even sure what this glyph is. This is a major text that he cited. So as we're making these points, as we're making these arguments, we need to actually look at the original text. That's a historical method. Next slide. And I'm going to go quick. Next slide. I'm going to skip this. And so I'm going to end this presentation on instructions from Mary Carre. Brother Reggie has mentioned this also, but I wanted to talk about this text a lot. Strengthen your borders, your frontier patrols. A wretched he who desires the land of a neighbor. Troops will fight troops, as the ancestors were told. Kemet fought in the graveyard, destroying tombs and vengeful destruction. What is going on here, folks, is that, and I disagree with Ogden, because it is not Mentuhotep II that is creating the concept of Kemet for the nation. That is, that in the process of the ancient Egyptians fighting themselves during the first intermediate period, this term has evolved, kind of like Kasi. This term has evolved from a descriptive kind of social concept, and it has taken on a different geopolitical connotation in the environment of the first intermediate period that culminates with Mentuhotep II, but does not begin with Mentuhotep II. And what they're saying is that on an ethnic on a geopolitical level that we're the black country. And they're saying that to reaffirm who they were as a people, and also in their principal opposition of Western Asia in this text. Next slide. Lo, Dr. Carruthers quotes this all the time. Lo, the miserable Asiatic, he is wretched because of the place he's in, short of water, bare of wood, his paths are many and painful. Because of mountains, he does not dwell in one place. Food propels his legs, he fights since the time of the forest. I made Lord Egypt attack them. I captured their inhabitants. I seized their cattle until the Asiatics abhorred Kemet. This is where Ogden is translating Kemet as Egypt. That is, that it goes beyond talking about the quote-unquote soil. And that's what the town determinative. And as Gardner translates this determinative in his hieroglyphic sign book, is that glyph implies an inhabited region. That is, you're talking about the country and its people. And so what they are talking about when they say Kemet as the black country, they are talking about both the country and the people. Thank you very much. Next panel, folks. We got to be on time.
Okay, peace, everyone. I hope y'all were able to catch that. It looks like our good brother Wudjau is in the building. And I think I set that thing to mute. And you may have to unmute yourself. It doesn't look like I can unmute you if you are listening.
All right, peace.
Peace.
All right, the family. All right, so I'm just gonna chime in where I can. So I just watched the tail end of the video.
All right. Yeah, I decided to do it a little differently this time. So I just let the last 8 minutes or so play, and then was just going to make a comment on the overall last, segment of, his presentation and some of the highlights of it. So you have any comments at the moment?
Oh wow. Well, I mean, where do we start, really? Well, the only thing I'll say is that we pretty much dealt with I hope everyone realized that, as we said, I guess in the first part, that he didn't address the actual topic of the issue, and he went off topic. And so we are addressing what he's saying and things. And because he gave his conclusion early on in his presentation, we basically addressed his overall presentation already. And I guess this particular last part is a little bit more specific on a couple of things I think we could kind of walk through a little bit.
Cool beans. So yeah, I mean, I guess I will address the segment. So let me recap a little bit. Where I started the video, Dr. Beatty was talking about Ogden Golay's article on Kemet, his 1999 article on Kemet, and where and how it was used and when it was first being used in the literature to reference the state, the polity. And so in that conversation where we started, he was literally talking about this distinction between two terms in the Egyptian language for borders, and how that plays into the Egyptians' conceptualization of the state. And so he's putting this into his larger argument, because remember, he doesn't address our question dealing with what is the meaning of the place name Kemet. What he's doing is answering his own question of how, or for what reasons, what are the motivations for using the name Kemet at this time period, when during the 11th dynasty, when we have the first records of this term being used to reference the state. And so so that's what he's trying to answer at this particular point. And so within that context, he makes the argument that he agrees, first and foremost, that the word Kemet is written with different classifiers or determinatives for people who still understand it by that term. And one of those classifiers is the N23 classifier. It is an icon of an irrigated land, irrigated canal. And so he acknowledges that rendering of Kemet. And he also agrees that if you see Kemet with that classifier, then it is appropriate and right to translate it as the Black irrigated land. Now, first and foremost, again, my argument is that the word Kemet does not reference color at all. And so my argument is that it wouldn't be translated as Black irrigated land. It would just be simply translated as irrigated land, for reasons, of course, which we outline in the book, A Contribution to the Debate on the Meaning of the Place Name Kemet, and in more detail in the upcoming text that I mentioned before. So within that, so he says, if you see that classifier, the N23 Gardner Code N23 classifier next to the word Kemet, that it means irrigated land. However, if you see it with the 049 determinative or classifier, it is to be interpreted as the Black nation. And as you saw in the latter part of his argument, he again has a modified Diopian argument for the meaning of the word Kemet. So he's saying that it means both at the same time, the Black people and the Black country, which is a more abstract reference to the peoples and their skin color. So remember, Diop argues that it doesn't mean Black country, that it specifically means Black people. And so with him even agreeing on that one instance, goes against Diop's argument, because he argues that it doesn't mean Black land at all, and that it only references Black people. And so it is right now I want to address the 049 argument. So this is something that I addressed in my 2014 response. And remember, my 2014 article is really an online response to a debate on the meaning of Kemet that we were having on the EgyptSearch.com website and forum. And so because of the formatting, I couldn't really put my arguments in a concise way on that platform. So I decided to put it in article form first and then put it on the website for debate. So that's how that article came to be. But so I initially addressed what I'm about to address now in that text, but I've updated that argument and brought even more stronger evidence for my argument concerning the 049 glyph. And just like with the meaning of the word Kemet, that the Egyptologists are essentially in error in translating the 049 glyph or interpreting it as a town plan with crossroads, so to speak. And you can actually see the 049 glyph on our cover here. There we go, right here. If you are looking, so you'll get a better view of it when I share my screen. So I'm about to share my screen now again, and we're going to focus over here. Let me reduce this window. And I have the wrong date on here, but that's okay. So we're going to wait a second while it does its thug thizzle. So I'm going to give it a second to pop up on your screens. I can't see, but I'm just going to wait a little second anyway. So let me hide that over there. So ignore this date. Today's the 10th of May. So again, this is part 3. And so I'll skip that. We're going to come back to this. So as I was saying beforehand, the word Kemet is written with the N23 and the N36 hieroglyphs. And so if you don't know by now, my interpretation and new definition for the meaning of Kemet is wet, irrigated, damp, fresh, damp ground, irrigable land, or a land with a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. So this is, and this is the Sumerian cognate for the term. And we've already done a video going through that. In the upcoming article, you will see this in a more neatly and organized fashion. So here are the variations of the word Kemet. So, and these are some of the earliest renditions. Again, this is the N23 Irrigated Canal classifier that you see on the right. N36 channel, this is another form of irrigated land. It also doubles as a word for river or flood or anything dealing with an abundance of water. And then you have the 049 glyph, which is in dispute as of this moment. So he makes the comment that I make the comment that when you see the 049, that it is interchangeable with these two glyphs. And so he said I was wrong. But as I demonstrate in the article, he is wrong. Because the way that you can test this is to look for other words for which there are 2 or more renditions of the same word, but just with different classifiers at the end. So one example that I show here is this word Sapat, which means district, nome, or necropolis. So you see it written over here with the N23 classifier, right? The irrigated land. You see another variation of this word written with the 049 glyph. These are the exact same words. The only thing that's different, besides this extra stroke right here, is that this are the classifiers. And so it's letting you know that this word sapat belongs in the class dealing with irrigable land, land suitable for life, which is why it's a district or a nome. It's a habitable place because it has irrigation channels. So he is incorrect. And you can find this in the Wudjau Bush in any dictionary. You'll see a whole bunch of words with the same interchanging of the hieroglyphs. So what I noted in the 2014 article is that the 049 is not a town glyph with as a city plan or two crossroads. This is an error in thinking of early Egyptologists who were transplanting modern ideas of urbanization to the ancient rural agricultural people. The Egyptians never had an urban metropolis. All of Egypt was agricultural. What the places where the people lived, they were all rural spaces. So they didn't have our concept of a city. And so you can't even translate it as the word for city. They're all rural agricultural spaces. And what I argued is that the 049 glyph is simply a variation of the N24 glyphs. And so you can see these variations of N24 here, just with focus on different areas. You see them kind of tilted in one and straight in the other. These are all the same. These are all different variations of the same irrigated land. So this is where you would, you have water in these spaces here, that would drip, and flood in these areas where these plants were, And so this is a different variation. So when you look at the 049, which you can see here, you can see that it's just this one little corner. It's not a crossroads, it's a cross section or a crossing of irrigated channels. These crossings right here that you see here, that's all this is. It's a stylized version of that. And so since then, I have found in a journal article that was originally written in 1997, who independently of I came to the same conclusion regarding the 049 glyph. So I discussed this in our book in chapter 3, starting on page 72. So it is a gentleman by the name of Jonathan von Lepp. And the title of his article in the journal is the hieroglyphic sign Nut a village with crossroads? And so in it, again, he just reinforces what I stated in the 2014 article. And what he argues is that these are just stylized myrrh. So let's go back. So this N36 hieroglyph here that you see a little clearer here, this, I think it has different consonant sequences, but the primary one is myrrh, M-R, right? So there's a word myrrh that means riverbank, bank's edge, dikes, dam, but also just water channel, canal, right? So this is what these things represent, all of that. So when you think about a river, all a river is a large canal or irrigation channel. Because remember, that the Egyptians lived in the riparian zone. So just like in in irrigation, where the overflow goes into the other drier areas of the soil, the same way that the Nile River floods the edges and the shores along the bank's edge. So these are the same words here. So what he shows, he presents this here. So he shows the Mer glyph, which is just one of these little sections. And then how it doubles here, which you see in these corners that I'm pointing out here. Hopefully you can see my mouse. And how it turns into the 049 glyph. And then how it's even stylized even more and put into more variations as you see here. So what is it exactly that we're looking for? And this is the word sapat. So that word sapat that we saw earlier, this is one way to say that. This is the sapat glyph. This is Mer. So the sapat glyph is made up of many different Mer or Meru glyphs. That's what you see here. And so a 049 newt is made up of 2 Mer. And these are even more Mer canals, water channels. And so this has to deal just like the N23. This is why the 049 is interchangeable with N23 and the N36, because it is a different representation of the same glyph. Let's continue. So this is a reconstruction of the ancient Egyptian bassins. That's what we're looking at, a bassin. And so up top here, this represents the desert's edge. And then you see these long dikes. And so what happens, so what I'm pointing at right here is the Nile River, right? What they would do is they would dig these canals, these channels that you see right here, right? When the Nile would flood, it would flow into these channels. And then they would be dammed at these points that you see here. So what the Egyptians would do is release a little bit of the water that is held up here to irrigate these sections here in between the canals. And that's how they would water their plants, because in Egypt, it did not rain. So here's a more detailed reconstruction or drawing of it. So you can see the sapat in real time, in a more clearer way, and understand the function of the 049. So an 049 would be this section right here. This would be the 049 glyph. So I'm hoping this is becoming clear. And so, as I stated, there's some other evidence that this is a water channel and not a town, a crossroads. So I'll just read. This is from the text. I think this is page, what is this on our, this is page 76 of our text. Actually, my bad. Well, part of it is on 76, so it's 75, 76. So I say, lastly, there are a few instances where the 049 glyph was depicted in color. From the color variations of this motif, it is clear that water and land are the focus of this hieroglyph and not a crossroad from a city plan. In the Old Kingdom tomb of Ptah-hotep, the newt sign is painted in black lines with a blue interior cross pattern. In the tomb of Akhet-hotep, which is nearby, the color black is substituted by the color red. Van Lepp interprets these colors to represent the black and red soils found throughout Egypt. The presence of additional triangles on the 4 corners of the motif are land formations. These are common in Old Kingdom versions of the newt symbol. Evidence to support this notion may be found on an earlier Amrashian pottery design that has strong correlations with the later Nut symbol. In a later New Kingdom tomb of Nefertari, there is a rendition of the Nut sign with slight modifications to the traditional patterns. Firstly, the triangles in the four corners are no longer present at the color, and the coloration has changed. The interior cross pattern is green and the outside lines are now blue. It is clear that the interior coloration was meant to signify irrigated land, which was provided water from the surrounding canals. And the page in which I quote and show figure 3, and it's also in Williams Flinders Petrie, Prehistoric Egypt, right? So because the book is printed in black and white, when I put these images in the text, I just labeled the colors, since you can't see them. And I guess I just didn't have time to do it here. But the outer, this land formations here is black because the soil is black. But the inside here is blue. And so, blue is the universal color for water. And so we have another rendition of red here, which is, and then the inside is still blue. And this is from the Imhotep tomb. But in Nefertari's, the inside is green and the outside is blue. And so showing that the water coming into the green space where the grass is, and this is where the seeds and everything are thrown for the plants to grow. So the evidence from the irrigation canals, just the structure and design of those, as well as the actual color renditions of the Nut symbol, totally destroys the notion that these are town symbols. Because again, there's no circular plans, there's no circular cities in ancient Kemet. They all had rectangular designs. And so, but in the prehistoric times, there was water shown in the circle motifs. But I wanted to address something else again to reinforce this notion that these signs are interchangeable. Because as I noted in the article, matter of fact, I noted this in the 2014 article. And so this is from a text by Henry Fisher, Ancient Egyptian Calligraphy, A Beginner's Guide to Writing Hieroglyphs. On page 35, he discusses the N23 Irrigation Canal. So this is a screenshot from the text. And so this is the hieroglyph here that he drew. He says, in my Dendera book, I note that the Old Kingdom determinatives, N20 and N22, and N20 to N22 and AA12 became N36. So this is the Mer. So these glyphs are the earlier renditions of the N36 glyph in Dynasty 8. Then in late Dynasty 11, they became this. So there's a reason why N23 and N36 interchange, because they're different variations, as I said, of the same glyph, which are different variations of these earlier glyphs. So let's continue. This is from Alan Gardner's Egyptian Grammar, 1957, page 488. So he's talking about the tongue of land glyphs here. Excuse me. And so N20, tongue of land, determinative in Wudjeb or Wudeb, sandbank, or the pyramid text Wudjeb, sandbank, shore, hence phonetic Wudjeb, which you see here in the pyramid text, turn back and derivatives. From Old Kingdom onward, a sign of like appearance is used, yada, yada, yada. So we go to a variation of N20, and that's N21, determinative land, especially in Edeb, abbreviated Edeb, bank, region, Edebwi, the two banks, therefore Egypt. more widely used in Dynasty 8, then often taking the place of earlier N23 in Ta Earth and Akhet Fields. In Demi Town, you can see, this. And so these are interchangeable. That's good. My bad. I said 8 when this was actually 15. 18. Dynasty 18. And so the N22 glyph is a sandy tongue of land. Old Kingdom prototype of both N20 and N21. So this one came earlier. So you have, if you look at this carefully, it looks like the N36 glyph. Just with the curved edge over here and a flat edge over here. So this becomes N20 and N21. And these become the N36, N23. They're all the same. These are actually, it says tongue of land, but these are actually the edge of riverbanks. So the land is over here. The river is inside here. On the inside, it's just closed. And so this is what you see with the Kem glyph that I discussed in chapter 3 of our text. So this is why for the word Kemet, you can see the N36 and N23 interchange. So in the Wartabush, and so this is book 5, page 126. It has this from this text. It says Emir Kemet Neb Desheret Neb. And so I translated the king of all the cultivatable lands and the desert lands. And so this same phrase, the exact same phrase is written with the N23. And so it's the same, you translate it the same. So this is on page 494 of book 5 of the Erman and Grandpa Wartabush. And so even the Wartabush tells you that all 3 of these signs interchange. So that Kemet is written with all 3 of these signs. So we already saw that 049 interchanges with N23. And N23 interchanges with N36. They're all the same glyph. Variations, different stylized variations of the same glyph. And so Mario Beatty, again, is incorrect on his assessment. And so when you understand that, you can better understand why Kemet refers or it belongs in the domain of land with an abundance of water, with irrigatable land, the land along the river. And so, based on the sound meaning correspondences between Egyptian and Bantu, I argue here that this definition is applied to Kemet. And so in the Herero language, you have Oenganda, which is cognate with Kemet, which means village. In other languages, it means country. Properly a new pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. And so that's what you saw with those 049 glyphs, an abundance of grass and water. So in the Nefertiti tomb, you saw it with grass and water. In the other ones, the main focus was water. And so no matter which angle you look at this from, Kemet does not refer to, in any form or fashion, relate to Black people or Black land. And so the Europeans are closer to the truth with their interpretation of Black land. And as genius as our elder Dr. Diop is, he was way off with his interpretation of it meaning Black people. And so, Kemet again is a land with an abundance of grass, water, and edible plants. And a Desheret is absent grass, water, and edible plants. And as I show in the new text, this word Desheret has nothing to do with the color red. This is another type of land absent of grass, water, and edible plants. So, these are the cognates of the terms, which y'all should know by now. And so Oscar Perfuma has provided some of these cognates for the word Kemet in these Bantu languages: Kam, Basa, Farm, Ikam, in Esitako farm. In the Runa language, kama din is a suffix, all meaning farmland. And then Kim in regards to country, city, or village. Kom, country, region of the Balu language. Ikoma, city. Kom, rural area. Komwa, country, region, etc., etc. And so, as we've argued, that Egypt is a riparian land. And so that's why they could take the river signs for river, the Glyph, and even the N23 is used in a few instances, you know, even for marshes and lagoons, because this all has to do with flood water that floods and waters the areas alongside the river. That's what a riparian land is and refers to. And so, you know, and we got even more evidence. It's like, we're not leaving any wiggle room. You cannot squirm and use flattery language to get out of this. There's no way around it. We've covered all bases. And so I'll end for now on that. And Wudjau, if you have any commentary.
Okay. Now that was good. And, you know, I just want to keep, I guess, for the listeners that, you know, I know you made reference to the text. And so, you know, just as a reminder that, you know, the text contains essays that are complementary to the ASCAC presentations. And so a lot of this stuff was already written prior to the event. And getting feedback in my microphone. 1 second. Okay, I think that's fixed it. So a lot of this was written prior to the event. And so a lot of things, because you know, as you said, you've been investigating the question for approximately 20 years. And I've been looking into this for quite a while, not as long, but quite a while. And so engaging in the conversations about this, you can anticipate what the arguments have been and what they will be. And so the essays were written, you know, just keeping in step with the conversation. And so we've already dealt with a lot of things that were said in Dr. Mario Beatty's presentation. It's just the fact that he went off of he missed the mark in terms of our specific topic issue, and topic question. And so it makes it seem, and so I'm saying this because I don't want people to view this and see that, you know, anything is different. You know, the entire point was off topic, and we're just addressing these additional points because in the larger question, in a larger research question, all of these points, you know, should be dealt with and tackled. You know, like Asar said, we're not leaving any stones unturned, crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's. So this is good in that regard, and this is why we're sharing this. But I just want to share something real quick just to kind of add to what you just gave. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. I don't know if you have it on me for the viewers.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me get back my cursor over here. So yeah, I just wanted to show some more examples of, now I know these pictures may be a little small, but what people can do, they can Google riparian zone and just do some you know, fundamental some surface research if you want to quickly look up riparian zone. And so these are 3 visual examples of riparian zones where you have to have water. All right, that's number 1 in a riparian zone is water, and then the surrounding area that water feeds. And a riparian zone, it needs water, and then the effects that water has on the area becomes the riparian zone. And so these are 3 different renditions of the riparian zone. Now I want you to just look at it. Just do the eyeball lookership for a moment. Just look at these 3 examples. Okay. And then if you go and look at the cover of our text, you'll see this is an over or satellite image of Kemet, of now the Arab Republic of Egypt. And so you can see, you can't see the Nile River per se here because it's so far away. It's zoomed out so much. But you can see the riparian aspect or the zone that's affected by water. This here, this green that you're seeing running down the middle is a result of the presence of water. And if you remember that a riparian zone, it needs water, and it's the effects that water has on the surrounding areas. And this is exactly, lost my cursor. This is exactly what we're seeing here. This is the presence of the river. Everyone knows about the Nile River, or the Happy Itaru, as it was called. That's the water, and the effects that the water has on the surrounding areas is what produces Kemet. So we are literally looking at Kemet here. And there's a contrast between Kemet and then Desheret on the left and the right of this here. And so here, I just want to share this here as well. This is a map of the major settlements known throughout the entire history of ancient Egypt, or Kemet. And the map is so big, you know, as far as sharing it, I have to share it in parts. So this is the topmost portion, which scholars refer to this as Lower Kemet, which will be the north on our maps. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. But if you look at where people actually live, everyone, all of the so-called nomes, but historically called sapats, they're all located near the river or a tributary of a river, because in the delta, the Nile River fans out. And today there's less fanning or less tributaries or resulting from it than in the ancient times, but you can still see their existence. But all of these settlements are near water. Okay, so this is the top portion, what we call Lower Kemet, and I'm going to step down, move it down gradually. Now, just as a reminder, on this map, you'll see some names that are away from the river. That's only because they run out of room to, you know, to write the names, and so they have arrows pointing to where they are, etc. All right, so I'm gonna go down. So here's, you know, moving down. If you notice, look at all of the towns and settlements are all near water, all near the river. Going down towards Upper Egypt or Upper Kemet, same thing. You have the names over here, drawing an arrow, but all the arrows are pointing closer to water, closer to the river. All right. So again, you see the river, and then the zone, this livable, inhabitable, productive zone that's a result of the water is what Kemet is. And so here is an actual aerial shot of the Arab Republic of Egypt, or ancient Kemet, to show you the stark contrast and to show you the riparian zone itself. So this is an actual overhead aerial shot where you see the river, the Nile, then you see the riparian zone inclusive of the Nile, and it would be on both sides. Of course, this is only one side. And then extended beyond that, you'll see the infertile, dry area that is absent of life, vigor, and settlement, etc., etc. So here's a stark contrast between Kemet and Desheret. All right. So I just wanted to share that and kind of just add to what you were saying. But that's all I have for what you were saying.
All right, appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, I'm sorry, y'all, I'm eating some trail mix. At this point, there's no argument that they're like anybody in opposition is just all over the place. And, you know, they just don't want to come to the fact that the ancient Egyptians did not have a racial consciousness the way that we do today. And so, but you know, that's just the nature of scholarship. There's those who are conservative in their thinking, and then there's those who are more progressive. And so, you know, the full arguments will be out in the near future. And you know, that's all I can say on that. But I wanted to move on to another point, which was he makes a statement in the video talking about Dr. Beatty, who is talking about Ogden Golay in his 1999 article, who made the argument, he's making an argument that Ogden is making an argument that Mentuhotep II is the one who invented the word Kemet. And Ogden Golay never says that. He just simply states that during the time period of Mentuhotep is when the word Kemet is being used as a national designation, you know, around that time, somewhere around that time. And so we have to bring some clarity to that. Ogden never claims that Mentuhotep II created the word Kemet. And so you won't find that in this text. What else?
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that kind of gets into what Dr. Mario Beatty said at the beginning of his presentation. He said that there's a lot of talk about what Kemet is, but he wanted to talk about why Kemet. And so, and in our part one of our discussion, we emphasized that point, that the fact that Dr. Mario Beatty did that is by his own admission that he, well, not his own admission, but his own statements that he went off topic. All right, because we're talking about what the word means, the meaning, the semantic meaning of the place name Kemet. And he wanted to discuss, and he did discuss or attempt to discuss why Kemet. All right. And so this ties right into what you were saying, Mentuhotep, or the reason why, what's the motivation for them to even use the word Kemet. And this is where you get the idea and the reaching where, well, the people are cattle and bulls. And because the bulls are black, the motivation was, ancient Kemet and its pre-dynastic, whatever, was a mythical land of blackness and this. And Mentuhotep just simply reached back, in history and came out with this concept and wanted to name the country Black people after all that. So, I don't know if you played the part where I know it's at the end where he said that it's talking about the nation,
yeah, that was going to be my next and final
point. Okay.
So It wasn't that many, that we couldn't really summarize or we haven't addressed already. But that was the last and final thing that I have noted here, was his statement that Kemet, refers to, again, the skin color of the people, and then the nation as a whole, which still really is just a way of saying the people. So he's saying that, but in essence, he says it refers to the land and the people. So the land in terms of political territory, and then the people in terms of their skin color. And this is just erroneous on all levels. And, for the exact reasons which we have already stated throughout this series and throughout our text, and which will be strongly, chipped away in terms of that argument in the upcoming text. It's just not writing exact at all. And there's just no way to get around that. Because again, it doesn't have anything to do with the skin color of people, first and foremost, because again, as Wudjau says every week, it is a toponym, and toponyms never refer to people, only places. And secondly, its meaning. And so again, we have to address the notion of frequency. And I think we've already addressed this, but we have to re-emphasize this. The word Kemet, with the seated man and woman with the plural strokes, there's only one papyrus with that rendition of Kemet. 99% of the words for Kemet are written with those variations of irrigated land that we saw earlier, N23, N36, and 049. So let's just assume that, for the sake of argument, that they are correct, that this instance of Kemet refers to the skin color of the people, and it means black people. Because it is only found in one text, in two, maybe three instances, and one is really unclear, but we can get into that a little later. How do you now make this one instance of the term supersede how it is written 99.97% of the time in the Egyptian records? And so we have hundreds of texts with the word Kemet written in it, and they all, for the most part, with the exception of the Calhoun papyrus, was written in hieratic, with the irrigated canal glyphs in terms of its classifiers or determinatives. How do you make that argument in terms of the importance and the conceptualization? How does that one instance override the hundreds of usages, with the emphasis being its association with water, being a habitable place, which he's already admitted in terms of N23. So remember, he already agreed that when you see Kemet with the N23, you can interpret it as proper to interpret it as the black irrigated land. That's what he said. But he tried to make an argument that with 049 is different. And we just demonstrated that 049 is just another variation of N23. And so there's a contradiction here, which he's going to have to reconcile within himself. And so the vast majority of these forms have to deal with it referring to a place, a habitable place. And so, there's really not that much more to say, on that point, at least from me. So you have any words? Brother Wudjau?
Okay, I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah. I just want to say a few words. Let me just share my screen again. And this is just hopefully that those in the viewing audience have already received their copy of the text. But since we have it in the text, I'm just going to quickly just share this small portion with everyone here. And in the text, and like I said, these are essays that are written before the event in anticipation of some of the things that will be said, because this is not something that is new to any of us. This is not something that was researched, overnight or whatever the case is. And so in this, I guess it's page 54 of our publication that I'm sharing. So what's discussed here is what's called national personification. And so the rendition of the word Kemet with the A1, B1, and X2, which is the seated, kneeling man, squatting woman, and these three strokes, it's an example, an ancient example of today what we will call national personification. And so that's when, a nation is personified. Now, today we kind of do it a little differently. We got a little more artistic with it. So, for example, in United States, the national personification of the United States would be, for example, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam would be a personification of the United States of America, all right, as a nation. And so this is discussed. So this particular Calhoun papyrus, which says he came, he caused the nation of Kemet to live and dispel its afflictions. This is why this is being referred to as the nation of Kemet. And so it's an abstraction, and it's a type of anthropomorphism, except we're doing it with the nation instead of maybe some natural phenomena. You know, when we personify natural phenomena, you know, some people refer to those as gods or deities. But in the case of nationhood and nationality and a nation or a group of people, it's also personified. And this is why even in text, you'll find that a nation can do human things. You know, like, for example, Kemet will go to war. Like the United States goes to war and fights in a war. So that's a human activity, fighting. We know that land doesn't fight. Land doesn't take up arms and goes, you know, over the oceans and fights another land, literally. So these are abstract personifications here. And so I just wanted to share that we discussed it, and we cover this in brief in our text, and it'll be fully explained in our upcoming text. But along with that, let me just share back here again. Okay, so along with that, we have Kemet, this particular rendition of Kemet being translated as the nation of Kemet. And again, Kemet means the riparian country. Okay, and a riparian is defined here is relating to or situated on the banks of a river. Does that not describe ancient Egypt? Yes, it does. Also, relating to wetlands adjacent to rivers and streams. Does that not describe ancient Egypt? Yes, it does. So that's what a riparian zone is. And so Kemet is a riparian zone. So this particular rendition is the abstract notion of nation of this particular place, which is the riparian zone. So it's a nation of Kemet, or we could further break it down and say the nation of the riparian country or the riparian zone. All right. So now you have to understand what a nation is. So just a quick definition of a nation. What is a nation? A people or an aggregation of men and women existing in the form of an organized rural society, inhabiting a distinct portion of the earth, speaking the same language, using the same customs, possessing historic continuity, and distinguished from other like groups by their racial origin and characteristics, and generally, but not necessarily, living under the same government and sovereignty. So this is the abstract notion of nation. And then country. What is a country? The portion of the Earth's surface occupied by an independent nation again, or people, or the inhabitants of such territory. In its primary meaning, country signifies place. Okay. And in a larger sense, the territory or dominions occupied by a community, or even waste and unpeopled sections or regions of the earth. But its metaphorical meaning is no less definite and well understood. And in common parlance, in historical and geographical writings, in diplomacy, legislation, treaties, and international codes, the word is employed to denote the population, the nation, the state, or the government having possession and dominion over a territory. So I wanted to define those two terms because these are modern, our living modern conceptualizations of what a country is and what a nation is. And so we're dealing with ancient times. And so in ancient Kemet, they had this abstract notion of nation. This is why the nation would do this and the nation would do that, human type qualities here. But it's still not talking about the description of the people. And so we have this text here, and this is the same thing I just went over, but a little bit bigger so everyone can see. where it says ENF, he came, Sa'unk NF, he caused to live, Kemet, the nation, or the nation of the riparian zone. Keser NF, he dispelled, Senenu S, its afflictions. And so we emphasize this suffix pronoun here is a third person feminine singular, anaphorically referring back to its antecedent, which is Kemet, showing that this is a singular term and not plural, because most people interpret these three strokes as plural, and that's not the case, but that's another conversation. It's in a singular. It's grammatically agreeing, or what we call concordance, in the feminine, but it's referring to the nation as a collective, as a group, as this abstract notion. All right. And so that's pretty much all I wanted to address with this particular rendition. As you said, in this papyrus here, it's actually, we call it the Kahun papyrus, but it's the hymn. It's one of the hymns to Wasoret III, and so it's found 3 times in this particular text, between near line 5. This is a particular line 5, and so this is where this is. And in terms of frequency, as you mentioned earlier, out of the thousands of texts that we have access to, like you said, 99.99% of the time, Kemet is rendered with some form of toponymic classifier or determinative, whether it's the irrigated channel in those 2 varieties, or what they're calling the circle. Looks like an X-Men belt buckle, but as you said, it's a cross section of an irrigation zone. Even with that, that's how Kemet is rendered, and this is what we have been discussing. As you see, these particular renditions here. All right. So our conversation has always been about the place name Kemet. So, any idea of, or question of why we're talking about the place name, I mean, that question would have to come 15 years late, because for the past, in your case, 20 years, that's all we've been discussing, is the meaning of the place name Kemet. And remember, Egypt we call Egypt today, is a shortened form of what is called more fuller, the Arab Republic of Egypt, as we would say in English. They call it, it's pronounced differently in Arabic, but the Arab Republic of Egypt was also called something else. And so what is that? So now, just look at the logic of it. You buy a plane ticket to travel to Egypt. It's not called Kemet anymore. So, we'll say, hey, I'm sponsoring a trip to Kemet. I'm going to Kemet, in the fall. Get your tickets early. Get a plane ticket. Costs about $3,500, $3,000 for a week stay to go to different sites up and down the Nile River. But you'll buy a plane ticket to go. Now, your plane ticket is not going to say Kemet. Your plane ticket is going to be whatever airport in probably Cairo, in the Arab Republic of Egypt. You understand that you're going to a place. You understand that you're going to a location on the earth. You're going to fly to a location. That location is called the Arab Republic of Egypt today. But if you swap Arab Republic of Egypt in for the word Kemet, then that alone should tell you that, likewise, you're going to a place, you're going to a location. So at all times, our conversation has always been the meaning of the place name Kemet. All right. So, I just want to reemphasize that, because, I'm basing on some of the commentary and questions that I have seen, to clear up that confusion. We've always discussed the place name Kemet. And it is indeed, as I always say from the get-go, that it's a toponym or place name. But that's all I had to say, as far as that goes.
All right. Yeah. Just to, as you stated, in the introduction of the book, a contribution to the debate of the meaning of the place name Kemet, I give an outline of the history that brought us to this point. And in brief, this originates, of course, in terms of the debate with Diop in his in the 1974 Cairo Symposium. And he's made that argument initially in print before that, I think in the 50s. But it's the Cairo Symposium where he tries to make that argument that Kemet means Black people in terms of a more public and more broader audience. And it kind of just went on the shelf. They had the debate, it went under the rug. You really didn't hear much about it after that until 1987, when Martin Bernal wrote his book, or published his book, Black Athena. And with Black Athena, it caused a big stir in academia, especially amongst the Greco-Roman classicists, because prior to that, they could dismiss, at least in their minds, some of the arguments coming from the Afrocentric school regarding the relationship and influence of ancient Kemet on the Greek civilization, especially in terms of philosophy and science. Well, here comes this white established researcher who creates this thick book full of citations, and it appears as if he is agreeing with the Afrocentrists or Afrocentric scholars. And so this was upsetting to the white establishment, the Eurocentrics, and they felt that they had to nip this in the bud. So all kinds of debates were going on in academia concerning this work. And so as a result of this, there was a woman by the name of Mary Lefkowitz, who in 1996 wrote a book, Not Out of Africa, how Afrocentrism is an excuse to teach revisionist history, I think is the subtitle. And this is supposed to, of course, be a rebuttal to Martin Bernal's Black Athena and the ever-growing population of African-centered scholarship. So she's took it upon herself to attack those two things. So in that same year, I think, HarperCollins, which is the major publisher of the sub-publisher who published Not Out of Africa, decided to put together a listserv, a digital online listserv, and invited Mary Lefkowitz and Martin Bernal to have an online debate concerning the arguments made in their respective texts. And so they both agreed, and the listserv was created. And if you wanted to witness what was going on between these two scholars, you had to join the listserv. So, however, the listserv, the arguments weren't only made by Martin Bernal and Mary Lefkowitz. Mary Lefkowitz also had some people, and there were some other scholars, some of them being Afrocentric scholars, who were also involved in the debate. So all of these people, and this listserv was open for a month straight. So there's all these arguments going back and forth. And one of the questions was, of course, to what degree did Egypt have any influence on the origins of Greek civilization? And then what were the race of the ancient Egyptians? So that seemed to be a big topic. And so because there were scholars of the African-centered school involved in the formal debate, they would bring up Diop's argument that, of course, the ancient Egyptians were Black African people. And not only can we tell as a result of the paintings on the wall, but the very name, argues Diop, of the country itself, Kemet, referred to the people and their skin color. So they referred to themselves, according to Diop, as Black people. So people are reading Diop's argument originally in the French in terms of his 1977 work, which was published, of course, by then. And then in the English translations of the article that you can find in the UNESCO text, General History of Africa, Volume 2. So people are using these arguments from Diop to counter the arguments against the Eurocentric school. And so it is in 1998 that I graduate high school. That same year, I go and matriculate into Southwest Texas State University. And so this is when I get introduced to the Dr. Beans, Asa Hilliards, all this other kind of stuff. And so at the time, I was still a Hebrew Israelite, a little bit of history. But this African, I'm weaning myself out of Hebrew Israelite doctrine slowly at this time, but I still had Hebrew tendencies, if you can say. So at this time, the scholars, are talking about these things, and I get wind of these listservs. So they still had a record online of the arguments back then. And since then, since it was 2 years earlier that the actual debate took place, since that time, other message board forums and other listservs, including Yahoo groups, were created to keep the debate and conversation going. And so I found myself part of those social circles. And I'm hearing a lot of these scholars for the first time, like Ayeli, what is his name? He wrote a book on Ethiopian writing. He was involved in the debates. Professor Manu Mpim, that's where I first met Manu Mpim. Dr. Clyde Winters, Dr. Raymond Davis, who some of y'all will know in the Seshu, the Sesh Mani Metanetra group. A whole slew, Brother Bonacci, who teaches Metanetra, former student of Raketi Amin, etc. All these individuals way back 20 years ago were on these groups making these arguments against, and there was some more people who y'all may not know, but who were a part of these particular groups. And so I got involved in these discussions because I'm looking at the arguments and I'm noticing some very fundamental questions that are missing. And that is, one, did they have the same kind of racial consciousness that we have today? And what are some other evidences that is the case? And as time progressed, we started, looking at the primary text. Well, how is the word Kemet being used in the text? I'm listening to some of the Afrocentric arguments, and they're arguing against the Eurocentrists and saying that, well, Kemet can't refer to Black land because there's no determinative for land. Well, as we just showed, that is not the case. Matter of fact, some of the earliest renditions of Kemet have the irrigated land determinative. So it refers to land. We know that. And so we know now that the 049 refers to land. So anybody saying that it doesn't refer to land because it has no photos of land aren't paying attention, because all three of those hieroglyphs refer to land. Now, so we had to look at it in the context of the text, and every text that we read, and this is when I first learning to read the Meta Nature, because of course, when I first started getting into these reads, I couldn't read it. And so as we were looking for it, and Brother Bonacci was breaking some stuff down, and Raymond Davis, and all of these other individuals, and some other cats who could read it, we couldn't find it being used in any other context other than a location. And so it was at this point that I understood, now that we have exhausted the philological method. Because now, in order to answer the question, we need linguistics. And so I had to study and read up on linguistics and linguistic methods to get to this, to the question. Because all other efforts and ways that people were trying to answer the question, it was just inadequate. And so, again, years, my first paper on this subject, I presented at a conference in Houston, Texas, at the University of Houston. It was an African American Studies Symposium. And the title of my paper was called "What's in a Name? The Meaning of Kemet." That was in 2002. That was my first official paper on this subject in 2002. And guess who I met at that conference? Dr. Mario Beatty. That was the first time I met Dr. Mario Beatty. He wasn't there for my talk in the room, but one of my former professors, and we're all frat brothers, he introduced me to Mario Beatty, and I let him know what I was talking about, and da-da-da-da-da, and I'm still a student over there. And so he gave me Dr. Theophile Obenga's number. And, Obenga, when I called him, he was still teaching at San Francisco State University. He's the one who encouraged me to study linguistics. And not necessarily because of this question, simply because I was in school for computer information systems. And he said that you'll be good at linguistics. You should try it. And so, throughout the years, now I wasn't like dedicated for 20 years straight, like every day, trying to, figure out what's the meaning of Kemet. But throughout the years, steadily getting into these debates online with scholars from around the world, Egyptologists, philologists, linguists, all on this question. And so by now, you can't say that you haven't heard everything, but by now I've seen and heard enough arguments that I know how to approach this question and what questions need to be answered, before certain people ask them. So, only in, 2014, 2015, actually, after I wrote that, because again, I was in another online debate on the meaning of Kemet on EgyptSearch.com. I wrote the 2014 article. And so it's in 2015 that Netter Neb, for some random reason, decides that he doesn't agree with my paper, but doesn't know why. So he's going to study to figure out why he disagrees with me on my 2014 paper. So he's been threatening to write a book and do a video series on the meaning of Kemet, basically for 4 years. And it never came to fruition. He never wrote the book. And so these arguments with Netter Neb are old, years old. And so he just pops up every now and then, still trying to argue on the meaning of the Kemet, or the meaning of Kemet. And, every single time he gets into an argument with us, we force him to change his argument. And so at this point, I just got to let Netter Neb be and let him live his life, because he has not progressed over the years in his studies of Meta Nature or linguistics. And, he does not comprehend well the material. And so, and of course, since Netter Neb failed, now Brother Reggie enters. Brother Reggie failed, so he has to try to lean on ASCAC, hoping that Dr. Mario Beatty could come and quote unquote finish me off. Well, we see that failed, because everything that he dealt with, we countered easily. It wasn't even effort. All we had to do was go to our book, pull stuff from out of the book that we wrote and brought to the debate, or actually the presentation, because it wasn't a debate. And so, and there's even more stuff to come out that, you know, that we'll be dealing with, you know, saying in the near future. And so there's so many, it's moved beyond simply trying to answer the question of the meaning of Kemet. That has been answered, is done at this point. But because there were so many peripheral arguments, you know, based off of this central argument, that it forced me to change my perspective on certain arguments in other areas, and it helped to, you know, open up new doors and even methods for discovering certain things about ancient Kemet. So, you know, these upcoming texts that we keep speaking about is going to address not only the central argument, but especially in our larger work, which we haven't named yet, we will have, you know, those peripheral arguments, including, you know, at least my argument on why Kemet was named Kemet. And it has nothing to do with what Dr. Mario Beatty is suggesting, you know. So that's just a, you know, a quick summary of how we got to today and where it's going. And so you'll see in these upcoming texts that, you know, we had to reevaluate a lot of things. You know, it's this meaning of the word Kemet that helped me to discover that one of the purposes of the T suffix is that it denotes land and space, and it derives from the word ta, meaning land. And so this will be made more clear in the upcoming text. And so there's just certain things even about the language that we have to reevaluate, that we're going to have to rewrite in our new grammars and things of this nature as a result of this research. So, you know, it's been a long journey, and, you know, I finally accumulated enough data that I think that I could put this to rest. But of course, there are going to be people who's going to try to find all kinds of ways to disagree. But as we said, I'm not giving them any wiggle room. Everywhere you go, there's going to be an answer, and there's going to be strong points that you just can't, you can't wiggle your way out. You have to address my work. Anybody dealing with Kemet is going to have to address our work on this subject. So it's been basically 2 hours now, and I'm not even checking to see if we have any questions or anything in the chat. I see you in chat.
Yeah, I had asked for people to type in the questions if they had any. Maybe you could address a few. But just real quickly, I just want to say, as some of the last things I say for tonight, is just to kind of remind the listening audience now, and then those who will be watching in the archive, that the way that this conversation has unfolded recently should not be the model of how these discussions should take place and transpire. You know, we're formulated a research question, and then we off to the races to go investigate and find resolve or resolution for this particular question, a solution, the answer to this particular question. And so what happens is, in the social media environment over the past few years, what's become normal now, or in style now, is this adversarial posture that dominates the discussions, you know, these discussions. And it's unfortunate because it slows down the progress, because with an adversarial environment, you have to do more things than you normally would, as if everybody was on the same page insofar as trying to make the best move. You know, so it's like either you are sparring yourself or playing a game against yourself, or you're playing a game against an actual opponent. And if you're playing a game against an opponent, your point is to win. But if you're playing yourself, And I always use the game of chess as an example. If you were playing an opponent in chess, you are trying to win. You're trying to beat the opponent. But if you play yourself in chess, your entire paradigm is different, because now you're not trying to beat yourself. Now you're looking at the game and you're making your moves completely differently with different parameters. Now you're trying to make the best move for both sides of the board. So now you got the white pieces and the black pieces. Now, if you're playing yourself, now you have to play both sides, and you're gonna be playing both sides for the best move. And so by the time you finish the game, the outcome of that would be you have reached a series of the best moves. All right. And you playing against the squares as opposed to playing against an opponent, and so on. And so that's what these discussions reflect. They reflect an adversarial environment where people who actually don't know how to fight are attempting to fight, and then they step outside the boundaries of what it takes to actually fight. And so it's like playing basketball but violating all the rules of basketball, but screaming that you're playing basketball. And so this is what's been going on as of late. And so what I just want to remind everyone is that don't take these, these recent, I guess for the past few years, quote unquote debates as if they're real debates, or as if this should be the way that we proceed forward. Because scholarship, at its core, debating at its core, is the word comes from a word that means to beat up, to hammer out. And so you're debating an issue because you're trying to bust it open to expose its guts so that you can find answers to research questions. All right. And so, debating has rules in order to achieve that. So what we're seeing is people arguing back and forth because they're trying to beat each other, and not so much the question, the actual research question itself. So it's unfortunate that people get caught up on that, and it just slows everything down to our own detriment. So I just want to reiterate that so this text here is a collection of essays, is written in anticipation of a conversation at a conference, the ASCAC conference. And so we have a follow-up text in the near future that's going to address everything in more detail. And like Asar said, to kind of, not kind of, but bring this thing to a close, to force everyone, bottleneck everyone, to force everyone to address these particular points and issues that are written about in the future text. And so this is how scholarship is progressed and grown. This is how science, this is how you add to the body of knowledge that we know. You document it. This video, because one of the things that I saw recently is, how, the question was, how do you make a YouTube video to argue against another person, or whatever the case is? And I guess the person asked the question or made that statement just didn't know that we wrote the essays prior to the event, and all we're doing in these videos is really just kind of pulling out, summarizing some things from the essays.
Not to cut you off, but this is something that I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I think when you were absent. Okay. And that is, the reason why we're doing the videos is because at the conference, there were no questions from the audience, and then there was no questions or rebuttals from the panelists. And because it was being recorded and uploaded to the internet, because of Dr. Mario Beatty's standing in terms of his prestige, in terms of his association with Obenga, and as being the president of ASCAC, those who are not mindful of the facts will look at his argument as authoritative, and it will be one-sided, given the fact that there was no one there to correct him and his errors that he made on stage that afternoon. And so because of that, because of those arguments being present on the web, where, you know, thousands and potentially millions of people can watch and hear, you needed that balance to bring the rebuttals that would have been present had we had questions and rebuttals at the actual ASCAC conference. So this is why we do this. Otherwise, you know, regardless, every conference that I go to, for those who are not present at the conference, I always come back and redo my presentation on my channel for the benefit of, you know, my subscribers and just people wanting to know, because often these conversations that happen at these conferences are not videotaped, and if they are, they're often not uploaded. So there are, you know, a vast amount of intellectual conversations going on all the time. But, you know, I like to put these things up here to kind of counter the young pharaohs, the setis, the polites, and things of this nature, and just the foolishness that you see from other people like Nature Boy and all this other kind of stuff. Whoever these other cats are, the Hebrew Israelite camps, like people are hungry for real scholarship, real knowledge, real debates, you know, saying in arguments. And so I try to contribute, you know, by putting this type of information on the net for free for people who have a vested interest in these subjects, you know. And then again, we also write. So if you really want, you know, a more complete argument, you know, check all of our text where we put these things, you know, we make these things available for the particular public. But I don't know.
Yeah, just one other thing.
Right.
I guess probably the last thing is, I don't know if you talked about this in the beginning of this conversation, but what also came up, you know, comes up recently, you know, and like I said, you know, kind of spin off what I just said, you know, people are violating what we call logical fallacies in efforts of maintaining this adversarial posture within the, you know, the social media climate. And like I said, don't look at that as the model to pattern yourself after when you're doing scholarship. And I'm speaking to any upcoming aspiring scholars, writers, researchers, etc. All right, so you know, train and do things properly as best as you can, and don't take some of these things that you see as models or for your behavior or your method. All right, but along with that, recently we've been called, you know, the Shamsu Heru research team. We've been deemed or called the Semshu Abdallah. So I don't know if you mentioned that
No, I didn't mention
early on. Yeah. And so for those who may not be familiar with, well, I guess it wouldn't make sense if you're not familiar with it, but for those who are, Abdallah is one of the scholars that was present at the UNESCO symposium. And he's the one that claimed that the word Kim doesn't mean black. And so because we are discussing this conversation on the meaning of the place name Kemet, there's a fallacy that's being made that we're being labeled as followers of this person, Abdullah, as if to say that we're also saying that the word Kim does not mean black. And so no matter how many times we explain ourselves, you know, we are still unfortunately being accused. And so this speaks to the character of some of the folks in our communities and what lengths that people will go to in order to, again, as I said, maintain an adversarial posture in terms of trying to do scholarship. And this is why it's detrimental. So for the record, again, I'll repeat it, that, you know, we understand. Yeah, you guys on the screen. We understand that there is a word that we transliterate as KM and we pronounce today conventionally as Kim that does mean black. It is an adjective. We say this all the time. So for anyone to label us as followers of a person who says that Kim does not mean black is really being silly and really displaying just overall bad character. So I just want to address that. So we're not followers of Abdullah, because what happens is people will use those talking points or those polarized little phrases to incite a different pathway in the discussion. So now it's supposed to throw us off, and we're supposed to talk about Abdullah and so on and so forth. Like, no, we don't believe that. Like, that's, we don't believe that. And I'm bringing it up because this is what Dr. Mario Beatty did in his presentation. If you go back to our first video, I believe, or the second part 1 or 2, we discussed we played where Dr. Mario Beatty mentioned Abdullah and mentions this as if he's trying to place us in that category as well. And so I just want to, emphasize that point, that these are, in terms of logic and stuff, these would be called logical fallacies, where you would mischaracterize the position of your opponent to give the appearance that you're beating them or that you're winning an argument, when in fact you're not. You're winning an argument against yourself. All right. So I just want to make that clear, that we're not followers of Abdullah or whatever. But I don't know if you want to kind of give a little summary of that exchange between Abdullah and then Professor Sonaran and some of that. I don't know if you either did already, or, we can kind of.
No, I was going to do it, but for the sake of time, I decided to leave it out. But since you brought it up, I will cite, this particular passage. So what he's talking about is the famous Cairo Symposium of 1974. There was a brother, Professor Abdallah, out of the Sudan, who made the argument that the word Kim doesn't mean black. And so what some others, this one brother in particular out of the French-speaking community, and more specifically Professor Dr. Beatty, he tried to associate us with Abdallah in his argument. And so this is a clear understanding, a clear example that neither our French-speaking brother, I forgot his name, Musima or something like that, whatever, and Dr. Beatty don't even understand, one, what the research question is, or even what our position is, because we've never stated ever in life. You can't find one place where we've made this argument, not even accidentally and misspoke, that the word that there isn't a word with the consonant sequence KM in the ancient Egyptian language that means black. That there's, I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly, that we're not arguing that there's not a word Kim that means black in the language. We've never argued that ever. And so to even associate our argument with that one shows that they don't understand at all. They never paid attention, or they just can't comprehend exactly what we're saying. And so, and what I've said and have been saying for a number of years now is that the word Kemet itself, Kemet, Km.t, in reference to the nation, does not have a root Kim meaning black. That is an error made by early Egyptologists. And so it doesn't mean black at all. Kemet, not Kim. And so there's a distinction here. And so this was brought up in the 1974 Cairo Symposium. And so the text that you see on the left of your screen here is basically a facsimile of some of the papers and even the arguments made at the Cairo Symposium. And so it's called The Peopling of Ancient Egypt and the Deciphering of the Meroitic Script, the General History of Africa Studies and Documents. This is published by UNESCO. So from what I'm citing, the conference recorder, puts this. So I'm pretty sure they had some videotape or some audio of this. And so the transcriber transcribed the audio from this session, and that person wrote detailed an exchange that was happening between Sheikh Anta Diop, Professor Abdallah, and then intervening is Professor Sonaran. And so this is important because Dr. Beatty, in his talk, he misconstrues the argument. Again, he tries to bring up Abdallah and says that Abdallah says that there is no word Kim, meaning black. And then he comes back and says Professor Sonaran says, yes, it does mean black. But then he stops. He doesn't say what was right after in the text. So that's what we're going to read right now and show what the argument was really about, which Dr. Beatty misconstrued the argument. So it says starting on page 82 going into 83 that Professor Sonaran, intervening in the course of a lively exchange of views on linguistic matters between Professors Abdallah and Diop, stated that Egyptian Kim, feminine Kemet, meant black. So this is where Mario Beatty says that no, Professor Sonaran came in and said, no, Kim means black. This is the line that he's getting this from. And so the the conference transcriber says the masculine plural was Kemu, still referring to the conversation being given by Professor Sonaran. And the feminine plural, Kemet, which is supposed to be Kim Woot. This is supposed to be a W. This is a misprint here. So the form Kemet could mean only two things. So this is what Professor Sonaran is saying. And so to back up, in this exchange between Professor Abdallah and Diop, Sheikh Anta Diop was making an argument that this word Kemet meant the blacks. So when we're talking about that Calhoun papyrus rendition of the word Kemet with the seated man and woman in the plural strokes, this is how he's interpreting that word as Kemet, which has a Nisbi marker here, and this is the plural here. So he's saying that this word means the blacks. So now Professor Sonaran is talking. The form Kemet could mean only two things: those of Kemet, the inhabitants of Kemet, the black country. It was a derived adjective, nisba, formed from a geographical term, talking about Kemet meaning a geographical space, which had become a proper name. It was not necessarily felt with its original meaning. To designate black people, the Egyptians would have said Kemet or Kemu, not Kemet-tu. Why? Because Kemet-tu is a Nisbi adjective, meaning those of Kemet, the inhabitants of. And so we had a whole series of videos talking about Nisbis. In any case, they never used this adjective to indicate the black people of the African hinterland, meaning that the Egyptians who depicted the Africans who lived to the south of them as black never called them Kim. So in any case, they never used this adjective to indicate the black people of the African hinterland whom they knew about from the time of the New Kingdom onwards. Nor, in general, did they use names of colors to distinguish different peoples. So you don't find in any text where the Egyptians talking about red people, white people, black people. They never describe people by colors. And so Dr. Mario Beatty, in essence, is disingenuous by not giving the full context of what Sonaran was saying and what he was responding to. He was correcting Diop on how to interpret the word Kemet. And in that conversation, he also mentions that the Egyptians never referred to people by their skin color. And so there's a whole bunch in here that has to be processed but it's not what Dr. Beatty was talking about. And it was irrelevant to our discussion because we never made that argument that of Abdallah that that Kim doesn't mean black. There is a Kim or KM consonant sequence that means black in the language. We know that. We acknowledge that. What we've always said is that there's a dozen or so words with the KM consonant sequence that don't mean black. So how did you distinguish that the word Kemet, how did you determine that the word Kemet derives from a root Kim, black, when you have Kim, so many other roots found in the language? What was your process of elimination? That's the question. So I just wanted to give that background and clarification for those who don't have this text and haven't read it, that Dr. Beatty, again, his whole entire, and I hate to say this about it, just his whole entire presentation was just off and wrong. And it's surprising, given his stature and his level of education in the glyphs and argumentation and things of this nature, that he could just be so wrong on so many points. But this is a clear sign that, he just got into this last minute and was trying to put an argument together for the conference, influenced by Reggie and what Reggie was saying the argument was, which he doesn't even comprehend what is actually being said, because he all over the place like Ned and Ned. And so now he got Dr. Mario Beatty looking crazy when Mario Beatty hasn't even researched this question, which is clear, which is why he totally abandoned it and decided he want to talk about his own thing. But I digress that point for now.
Let me just add to that. I want to share something as well, because as we all know and should be familiar with, at the 1974 symposium, who was also present was Dr. Theophile Obenga. And so in a more recent conversation or speech that Dr. Obenga gives, he does a summarized recount of the conference and that particular conversation. So what I'm sharing on the screen, this is from the seshmedunetra.com website. We have the video up there. You can see the whole video in full, and he's speaking in French, but it's transcribed. Everything he says is transcribed in English. So everything he's saying is translated and transcribed also in the article. Let me get my cursor over there. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so I'm gonna just scroll down to the portion I'm referring to. So everything you see in here as I scroll through is the transcription of what he's saying. So we come down to this point here. So now he's recalling, this particular event. And so this is the Dr. Obenga speaking. He says, there were only 2 Africans present. No, 3, including a Sudanese, Abdallah. And so this is the famous Abdallah that we're being accused of being followers of. Professor Abdallah. When we started the debate, Sheikh, and when he says Sheikh, he's talking about Sheikh and the Diop, of course. Sheikh said the word black, Egypt, Kemet. Abdallah rises and says, no, Professor Sheikh and Diop, you are wrong. The word Kemite does not mean black in ancient Egyptian. So this is a recount of what we just discussed. And then he says, meanwhile, me, that was falling asleep a little bit. So you can imagine Obenga being there, sitting down, and these scholars are having a conversation, and they're going back and forth. Once they get to some kind of disagreement, and they're going back and forth, and I guess it's getting louder or more intense, and Obenga is like coming up out of his cat nap or whatever the case is. But anyway, so he says, meanwhile, me, that was falling asleep a little bit, I woke up. I said, what is all this about? Everyone here present knows that Kemet means black. No? Abdallah insisted. I said, he's also a scientist. You never know. Here present, there are no apprentices, as everyone is a specialist. So basically saying, these are bona fide scholars here. So does everybody here? I thought we all agreed that Kemet means black. And so that's what he's saying. And then he goes on. He says, meanwhile, Sheikh Anta, and excuse me if this is too small, but I'm reading it. Meanwhile, Sheikh Anta was getting a little irritated. Something rare with Sheikh. He had self-control, but I saw him already getting excited. He said, listen, Professor Sonoran, you are here among us, the best grammarian. Now, mind you, this is Sheikh Anta Diop talking. So I want to put this in perspective. This is Dr. Obenga's recounting of the symposium event. And he's saying that Sheikh Anta Diop said, he turned to Professor Sonoran and said, you are here among us, the best grammarian. You have to speak out here. If you do not speak, Obenga and I will have to leave this conference and go. So this debate has gotten, I mean, this subject matter has gotten so intense that Diop is like, listen, I'm out of here if you don't speak up. Like he turned to a person who he holds in high regard, mind you, Professor Sonoran, as the best grammarian. He said, listen, if you don't speak up, man, me and Obenga, we out of here. So it says we got to go. It says it was a very serious situation, but what happened? Sonoran said, effectively, Kemet means black, and so that's what Asar just read. That's what you just read. So now, so then Obenga goes on and says, after the session, I went to see Abdullah, and I said, but why do you do things like that? You know very well that Kemet means black, no? Why contradict for the sake of contradiction? It's ridiculous. This is not serious. Since then, every time he saw me in the corridor, he says, yes, how is Professor Sheikh? I answered, he does not even greet you. And so on. So I wanted to bring this this portion up is because this is a recent recounting of the events by Dr. Theophile Obenga. So this reiterates the prestige or the viewpoint from Diop himself of this Professor Sonoran. And so what Dr. Mario Beatty did not do was, as you said, he didn't complete give the context of what Sonoran was doing. Because if you put these two stories together, you can get a bigger picture. So we have an argument between Diop and Abdullah. Abdullah is saying, no. It doesn't mean black. It doesn't mean black. And then Diop saying, yes, it does. And so on and so forth. Obenga wakes up, and then you got Professor Sonoran sitting around. He's there. He's coming to the conversation. He's like, look, you're the best grammarian among us. What say you? And so now, if you go back, Asar, and read that portion, now it starts to make a little more sense. You have more context to go with. So Sonoran is coming and saying, well, wait a minute now, listen. Kim does mean black, but Kemet.t is a word that means it doesn't mean, it's not referring to the skin color or anything like that. It means the inhabitants of this particular place. And as our text, as within our essays, we go on to explain that these are called demonyms. Demonyms are expressed in the Egyptian language through what's called relational adjectives, aka nisbis. So Kemet.t is a demonym referring to the inhabitants of Kemet, those who are related to this. So that's what it means. And so Professor Sonoran is saying the exact same thing. And so I just wanted to kind of put a little bit more context in there so that people can't clip it short and don't try to downplay the importance of the correction that or the addition to the conversation that Sonoran had at that particular moment. So we can't cherry pick and pick the fact that he says, okay, Kim means black, but then don't follow through and say, well, wait a minute, this particular word that you're showing us with this A1 and B1 and the three strokes, if you're interpreting that word as Kemet.t, then as a grammarian, that still does not mean black people. It means the inhabitants of Kemet. So, just wanted to kind of point all that out. So,
so we have to also expand that context and why this is important, because remember, this was Obenga has already stated that he is the best grammarian. Like if we're going to appeal to authority, like seems to be the case nowadays, if we're going to appeal to authority, we're going to go with Sonara, right? Because he's the best grammarian. And the best grammarian out of everyone at the conference has already stated that Km.t does not refer, you can't use that, it's grammatically incorrect to define that as the blacks, because it refers to the inhabitants of a place. So with that in mind, he's already corrected. And so when you actually read, let me exit out of here. I'm gonna go to page 82. Hold on one second. Give me a second, because I'm pulling up the PDF now of the actual document. So I just typed out that first one, but now, because you're going to see that.
Oh, I already had it. If you want, just I could share while you talk or whatever.
So okay, now I'm gonna share my screen again, and let me put it on me. Go back to sharing, share all, and y'all can see, what is happening here. And so I won't put on full screen this time. Y'all should be able to see this. So this is the area which I just talked about here. So let's go back up front. So it says, Professor Abdallah hoped that the inquiry would be pursued in the strictest fashion. He considered it impossible to establish any automatic correlation between an ethnic group, a socio-economic system, and a language, or to reach scientifically valid conclusions by working on a large scale. There were almost no unambiguous examples in history of major migrations accompanying major cultural transformations. Negro was not a clearly defined concept today as far as physical anthropologists were concerned. A skeleton did not provide evidence of skin color, which is true. Only the tissues and the skin itself were important in that respect. It was imperative to broach the study of pathology and of funerary practices without delay. So then it gets into that point. Professor Sonaran intervening in the course of a lively exchange of views on linguistic matters between Professors Abdallah and Diop. That's what I just read. So as I stated, it starts on page 82 and the last sentence ends on page 83. But look right after. So this is right after Professor Sonaran says, to designate Black people, the Egyptians would have said Kemet or Kemu, not Kemet-t. In any case, they never used this adjective to indicate the Black people of the African hinterland, whom they knew about from the time of the New Kingdom onwards, nor in general did they use names of colors to distinguish peoples. So now Professor Obenga steps in. Professor Obenga, in his turn, reverted to the linguistic demonstration which had been begun by Professor Diop. After criticizing Professor Greenberg's method on the basis of the recent work by Professor Istvan Fodor, and remarking that since the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, it was an accepted fact that linguistic evidence was the most obvious means of establishing whether two or more peoples were culturally related. Professor Obenga endeavored to prove that there was a genetic relationship between Egyptian and ancient Egypt and Coptic and modern Negro African languages. Before making any comparison, one must be on one's guard against confusing typological linguistic relationship, which gave no clue as to the pre-dialectical ancestor, yada, 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 yada. In other words, Obenga switches the subject.
Yeah.
So
and
just quickly, you know, because earlier in the text, Abdallah, so this is the part where, you know, it starts on 82, turning to the subject of linguistics, Professor Abdallah stated that Kim did not mean black, and its derivatives did not refer to color or of individuals. Now, this is conflicting right here, because it says in the transcript that Professor Abdallah said that Kim did not mean black. But given what you just read from the transcript of Obenga's statement, Obenga said that Professor Abdallah said that Kemet doesn't mean black. And if the latter is in fact the truth, then Professor Abdallah is correct. But if what is true is what is typed here in this text, that he stated that Kim, not Kemet, did not mean black, then Professor Abdallah would be wrong. But that's, you know, to be debated. And its derivatives do not refer to the color of individuals. He gave a linguistic demonstration in his turn to illustrate his theory, which differed from that of Professor Diop. I wish we could have got Professor Abdallah's linguistic demonstration. That would have gave us even better context of what he was saying. But this is where he messes up. He says he concluded that the Egyptian language was not a purely African language. It belonged to a Proto-Semitic group, as could be abundantly demonstrated by supporting examples. Professor Abdallah considered that the linguistic examples given by Professor Diop were neither convincing nor conclusive. So I'm assuming that Professor Abdallah is actually a linguist. He's a specialist in linguistics. Considered that the linguistic examples given by Professor Diop were neither convincing nor conclusive, and that it was hazardous to make too uncompromising a correlation between a language and an ethnic structure or an individual. So this gives us the greater context of what Obenga was responding to. So in that, so they're talking about the lively exchange on linguistic matters, talking about Egyptian being part of Proto-Semitic and being related ultimately to Semitic, and then that being interrupted with Professor Sonaran stepping in to correct Abdallah, saying that Kim does mean black, but also stepping in to correct Diop, saying that Km.t does not mean the blacks. And so Obenga, knowing that Professor Sonaran, who he just said is the best grammarian out of everyone at the conference, that he is correct, switches the subject from that and starts addressing Abdallah on the relationship of Egyptian to Semitic. So now, instead of dealing with the Kemet.t question, Obenga decides to revisit the linguistic question in terms of the relationship between Egyptian, Semitic, and modern Black African languages.
See, so obviously what we're dealing with is a conversation within it's a nested conversation. So the greater conversation was between the overall linguistic relationship and, you know, the Semitic issue. But within that conversation, Kemet came up, and then so they had a brief exchange with that. And that was the moment that was important enough for the stenographer to write down, and for Obenga to recall. Because, you know, mind you, this happened, what, 40 years ago, 50 years ago? No, 74. Yeah, it's been a long time ago. So for him to recall that moment, that must have been, you know, that book describes it as a lively exchange. Obenga in his recollection calls it the fact that Diop even got a little bit out of character, you know, during that exchange. So Professor Sonaran steps in, calms everything down, and address it as the prominent grammarian of the group. But hey, you stop sharing. I wanted to point out something on there, but it probably take too long to share again.
No.
Okay, yeah, put that back up. I want to and I know this video is gonna be long. This will be my last thing to say, even though I said that 30 minutes ago. But just real quick, if you pull that back up. This is something else that's being said. So, you know, and listen, I mean, you know, there's things to be said about everything that okay, is that the same page?
This is on the
okay, yeah, yeah.
Getting ready to speak.
Okay, yeah, that's the same page. All right, so now what I want to point out here is scroll down just a little bit. So this portion, just that paragraph, I want to read that full paragraph.
Genetic relationship?
Where it says after criticizing, where are we at? Oh, you went down, you went somewhere else. No, you
After
had it. It was just slightly cut off.
That one, after criticizing.
Wait, it must be a delay. There we go, right there, right there. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna read this. So, because you read it, but I'm just reading it again. Now, mind you, this is Obenga. Yeah, Obenga, the stenographer, describing what Obenga is doing. So, after criticizing Professor Greenberg's method on the basis of the recent work by Professor Fodor, and remarking that since the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, it was an accepted fact that linguistic evidence was the most obvious means of establishing whether two or more peoples were culturally related. Professor Obenga endeavored to prove that there was a genetic linguistic relationship between Egyptian. Now, I want to pay attention to what's in parentheses: ancient Egyptian and Coptic. And the reason why I point that out is because Obenga, if you look at Obenga's work, when he breaks down when he does the linguistic work to show how Afro-Asiatic is not a real language family, a genetic language family or whatever. And if you look at Obenga's tree structure of the languages, Obenga has consistently separated what he calls Pharaonic Egyptian from Coptic. And it's reflected in these parentheses right here: ancient Egyptian and Coptic. Because the reason I'm pointing it out is because people are kind of seem to be surprised when we come along and say that no, Coptic is a separate language from Middle Egyptian. But yet all along, Dr. Obenga, at least in his documentation, he visually represents it that way: Pharaonic Egyptian, or in this case, ancient Egyptian, and then Coptic. Because
no matter what, it would still be ancient Egyptian.
Exactly. So if Coptic is the last stage of ancient Egyptian, there would be no need to separate these two out in this parentheses right here. And the way that he does his tree structure. I wish we had that readily available show too, but we could do that another time. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that as you were reading that, it just I saw that. So I just want everybody to understand who's watching that this is not new. We're not the ones that are saying this. Mboli actually demonstrates this scientifically, but it was already there. Even Theophile Obenga, must have picked up on that to keep that separate consistently with him. But anyway, so I just wanted to point that out. And I know we could probably go on and on, but I know you want to keep it short.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll just end it there. So this ends our series, addressing Dr. Mario Beatty's commentary from the actual debate, or excuse me, the conference, the ASCAC conference in New York in April 18th through the 21st, specifically on the 20th, which is Saturday. That's when the actual conversation was had. And so, we played and addressed point for point everything that Dr. Mario Beatty has said. And so, to the best of our ability, trying to keep it concise in a video manner, but essentially everything was addressed already in our text. But so you can kind of get them an idea of what's in the text by viewing these videos, but there's more in the text, of course, than what's in the videos. But so we wanted to have this series out there so that people would not be confused on what the actual issues are, what our arguments are, and how off they were from the opposing side regarding this question. So, you know, I appreciate everyone who has taken the time to listen live, to catch the archives, to ask questions, to leave comments, even the hateration comments from Ned or Neb, who likes to troll our page. You know, I appreciate ASCAC for having the conversation and dialogue. It's an important one, and it's going to continue. And so I appreciate our good brother Wudjau for participating in all three conversations, and for his contribution to the text, you know, a contribution to the debate on the meaning of the place name Kemet. Can't hold it up enough. If you don't have your copy, you lost cool points, and to regain them, you must have this in your arsenal. And so again, this is part one of a series, and so it is best, because, you know, a lot of this stuff I'm not going to repeat, so I'll just be referring. Like in an upcoming book, I'm just going to be referring to this book when it comes to certain arguments. So you'll have to have this for when my next book comes out. When I refer to certain things, you'll know what I'm talking about and what page. So I don't inflate that chapter repeating stuff necessarily from here. And and then of course there's going to be the larger work, you know, where we'll get into even more detail. So so be on the lookout for that. And you know, it's been a long journey, a very rewarding one. And, you know, so much has come out of this research that, you know, I'm ready to get to that next level of conversation. And that is how to use this information in relationship to nation building, and how to design your society, and the kinds of relationships that must be present in order for you to build the kind of society that we revere in ancient Egypt, but in a modern and sustainable way. And so this leads into a conversation of, again, nation building and sustainability, agriculture, biology, science. That's where this conversation is. And so we're having to deal with the petty stuff because people are emotional and they've created identities with Kemet being Black. And so we have to destroy that aspect of it so you can get to the real information, the real focus of the ancient Egyptians that allowed for them to express themselves creatively in the way that you see on the temple walls and things. But it all comes from a basis of solving this problem of where is our water going to come from? You know, how do we get food? Basic stuff: food, clothing, and shelter. So, so that's where the conversation is going. And so you'll understand why this debate is necessary, because it's this aspect of the conversation that's missing when everybody wants to try to reconstruct ancient Egypt. And so everybody want to jump to netchers and netcheroos and doing chants and rituals, and all of that is good and dandy, but none of that will help you recreate ancient Kemet. If you're going to be a Kemite, technically you're saying you're a farmer. And if you don't even have one of those old school styrofoam cups with soil in it and a seed by the window, you can't call yourself a Kemite. I don't care how great your imagination is. You know, it starts with your relationship between the land and channeling and harnessing the power of water. And so, but that's another conversation for another day. And I'll let you have the last word, and then, you know, we'll get out of here.
Oh, real quickly, I just want to say Egypt is a Black land. But listen to that phrase though. Egypt is a Black land. if you really understand the context of even that phrase, when people say it today, it's in the concept of Egypt, ancient Egypt, being a African indigenously grown civilization. And that's the point. And so I don't want anybody to misconstrue anything that we have said, because people will do it. So I'll just point it out that we are not saying that ancient Egypt was created, managed, and maintained by anything other than Africans, outside of the foreign takeovers, during the Ptolemaic period, or whatever case is administratively. So we're not saying that the ancient Egyptians were not what we would call today socially Black people. And we're not saying that ancient Egypt was not an African homegrown civilization. All right. So I just want to make those distinct points very clear. All right. So, and in fact, Diop, Obenga, both say the same thing in their overall nuance of their conversation, because they call it white Africa versus Black Africa, with the emphasis on the fact that ancient Kemet, or ancient Egypt, was homegrown from Black Africa in that context. So I think the conversation is very, very confusing to people. And so that's what we're trying to do, to disambiguate the conversation, to bring some clarity. And it's going to take some time. And so we are up for the challenge, and just look out for our upcoming work on it.
All righty. So I want to give a shout out to the YouTube gods for not kicking me out this week, and I didn't have to use the backup program or show. So we went through the whole show without being kicked out, and doing the second part 2 of whatever part we were doing. So, extra libations tonight for the YouTube Netcheroos, in control of YouTube. Anyway, thank y'all for joining us. And again, keep your ear to the streets. If you have the book or plan on purchasing the book, in some of the coming weeks, we're going to host, if Brother Wudjau doesn't mind, we'll probably do it on his channel, a question and answer regarding the book. So, if y'all have any questions, regarding any material in the book, if anything was confusing, if we, you felt we left something out, or something to that nature, this would be a good opportunity to have a live question and answer with the authors. So we haven't set a date for that yet, but it's upcoming. And so join me next week, where I'll be doing a linguistics lesson. And I want to address this notion coming from some opposition to Mboli, that his renderings of Negro Egyptian, his reconstruction, is not valid, because instead of using IPA symbols for the phonetic values in Egyptian, he uses the transliterations, the common transliteration symbols that Egyptologists use to refer to those particular sounds. And so I'm going to show why it is a misinformed and erroneous argument, and in why it is. So that it is and why it is. And so I'm going to need some volunteers. So probably about 4, maybe 5 at the max. People who don't know nothing about linguistics, or even someone who does, at least have one other person who's, I need to find someone to see if they have time and can join us. But to join the panel, so you'll be actually on the panel. And so throughout the lessons, I'm gonna be asking questions to the panel, and then y'all respond. So I want to see how effective I am in teaching these concepts, and then I need to know in real time y'all's ability to comprehend what I'm saying, and that y'all get the argument and why these arguments that Team Apep, aka Team Osiris, and even Brother Reggie and Brother Dr. Cambone have brought up, and why they're erroneous. And so this is going to be a crash course into some fundamental arguments in historical comparative linguistics using logic, mathematics, and of course, we'll be comparing or being engaged in and involved in a historical analysis of the ancient Egyptian language. So, you know, by being involved in that conversation, you know, you'll be able to understand my work, understand some of the processes which you see in this text and upcoming text, and so you'll be able to better follow these discussions and to see what is happening when you see me do what I do, so that, you know, a true specialist would recognize, but a layperson may not. And so I have hidden arguments, I have hidden minds, you know, in these texts. So they just look like regular tables to laypersons, but these are hidden landmines for peripheral arguments that's going to come back to bite certain people in their arguments. So I have plans. So this is more than a book. So get it, digest it, read it again, read it twice, read it 3 times, start an argument with your wife with it at the dinner table. So anyway, those are my last words. I have nothing else to say. So God bless y'all and good night. And be safe this weekend. All right, peace. See you next week.